You know, we have such a multicultural area that we live in that's so rich in diversity. A lot of people, English is not the primary language. When that is happening, should they be requesting an interpreter? Are they entitled to an interpreter? How does that work out?
Well, in terms of entitlement, the agency is not required by law to provide you with an interpreter. However, they, in my experience, are open to do that. It becomes a little more difficult if you have some of the more or some of the less common languages. Obviously, Spanish is very easy to get an interpreter. It's easy to get an American Sign Language interpreter. When you start talking about languages that are less frequent in your area, it becomes harder. They have to go to the State Department. Sometimes they have to contact the court system. But they're willing to do that if you make a genuine request and if the concern is not immediate danger. The agency has to assess for immediate danger as soon as they become aware of a family. So if the family's allegation, if the allegation, if proven true, would place a child in imminent risk of harm, they're not usually going to wait for an interpreter for that. But if it's something a little bit more benign, you're more likely to get them to say, okay, we're willing to give you a day or two to get somebody to make sure that we can communicate with you, get as much information as possible, and to make sure that whatever the child is saying is truly filtered through the lens of someone who understands both the culture as well as the language.
It's interesting that you bring up the culture. With so many different cultures that we have in our area, do those, practices and commonalities from the home country get taken into account with what goes on here in the United States in New York, New Jersey?
Well, the politically correct answer is that it should be. In my experience, that's not usually the case.
Reality, yeah.
The reality is the law defines what our states consider child abuse and neglect, whether you're in New York, New Jersey, or some other state. And so whenever you have the allegation brought before the agency, they're going to look at the factors, they're going to look at what was done to the child, and they're going to consider whether or not this behavior actually harmed the child, placed the child at imminent risk of harm, or placed the child at substantial risk of harm, which is the definition of child abuse. If it doesn't meet that standard, it doesn't meet that standard. If it does meet that standard, it does meet that standard. And the fact that your culture may find certain practices more acceptable than others doesn't mean that the agency is going to look past it. Now, it may impact the way in which you're administered services. Obviously, if they refer you out to somebody who can help you with disciplinary techniques, if you're someone who believes in corporal punishment and perhaps it was excessive under our law and constitutes child abuse, but not in your country, they might want to get someone from your country to help you understand the cultural context in the U.S. But that doesn't mean that the finding of child abuse won't still be made.
And it doesn't mean that you're exempt from the law just because it's okay back home.
Exactly.